We would like to ask you a little bit about the recording of Poison for Profit. We know that the chant recorded at South River Recording in Indianola, Iowa. And so I'm sure that was probably your introduction to that studio and to Mike Lawyer. But you are listed as the producer on
Yep,
this cassette only release.
I
And
am. Yes.
we who knows what that means, ever, but we were just being interested in
Sure.
what the recording process looked like.
Well, actually, the chant recording wasn't my first time there. I'd
Mhm.
actually recorded there one time prior to that. So I had a little bit of familiarity with the studio, and I was trying to reflect on why I wanted or why I would have gotten production credits for the Poison for Profit release. And best I could think of, because honestly, I don't remember having a conversation with those guys saying, like, I want to be the producer or I'm putting up the money to do this or anything like that. I suspect it's more around the fact that I had experience there. I knew Mike a little bit, Mike Lawyer, and I probably was the one that said, we should go to South River. Here's what we should do. Here's some things we can do. Because I had at least a little bit of working experience there that it made it, I helped facilitate the project. I'll put it that way. Um, we probably went there just simply because it was a known quantity. It was local. It was fairly affordable. I mean, at that point in time, it was just an 8-track studio. It was in Mike Lawyer's house.
Yeah.
So it was just something that he had some property. He had some financial backing from the guys in Head East. um, and yeah, I don't know what else to tell you as far as the pre-production up to it. The actual recording process, as I recall, it was long ago that I don't recall a ton of detail about it, but it went pretty smoothly. The very fact that we have so much stuff on there, like just background vocals that aren't really harmonies sometimes and piano, I have to think that things went fairly smoothly and we felt pretty comfortable there. Um, Something that's different about this Sinister Flower Gift recording, our first LP, is we were really crammed for time. I remember being really stressed out about how little time we had for the LP, but I don't have that memory from the Poison for Profit recording session. Lawyer engineered it all, and the truth is, Lawyer probably should have more credit than he gets. Uh, I was maybe 20 years old at the time, and somehow, I probably thought I knew what I was doing. Uh, but ultimately, it was Mike Lawyer that was guiding us and helping us get stuff accomplished.
I'm you mentioned it was 8-track. Were you guys, and we haven't really spoken about this with anybody up to this point, but like, were you all in the same room together? Were the drums isolated? I'm just kind of curious as to what you remember from looking out from wherever you were recording. What was that?
There were separate rooms. So there was a drum room. There was like a vocal booth. There was a piano set up in a kind of a main room. I mean, there was a control room that I don't know that the control room was quite your normal control room in a studio that I think of. It was the basement of a house. It was a walkout basement, so it wasn't like some claustrophobic basement. It wasn't huge, but nonetheless, there was separation for all the instruments when we were playing and recording.
And we understand that that was the tracks were played live. And obviously, as you mentioned a moment ago, there were some things that were added after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back then, I mean, we did this with almost all of our recordings is we tried to record them not only live, but I don't even know that we thought or knew to do it any differently. And it was just like, okay, we're going to play this song. Somebody made a mistake. Okay, we're going to play it again. Oh, somebody made a mistake. We're going to play it again. So yeah, I mean, the piano and the background vocals and those kind of stuff obviously were done later. But yep, everything was done live.
We've mentioned this before, and I think it's worth mentioning again. Mike Lawyer has his hands on this recording. As you mentioned, you were all very young,
Yep.
and had limited experience kind of in studio, and that's something that's learned over time. But having said that, like, there is a real understated quality to these songs that Mike probably contributed to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to think of my interaction with Mike, and he was always really easy to work with. I think the fact that we were doing something fairly straightforward, just two guitars, pop rock kind of stuff, was in his wheelhouse. Um, and ultimately, one of the one of the things I would give him credit for was creating a really comfortable environment to work in. It always felt nice to go down there and to just show up and talk to him and be in a studio. I mean, that was as anybody who's a musician, being in a studio can be a magical place. It can be a really wonderful experience. There's so much opportunity in a recording studio that especially when you first show up to one, it's got this wonderful, optimistic feeling about things. And when I think of our recordings there, that's how I remember them. Is Mike was easy to work with. We got stuff done. Pretty much everything that came out of there that I recorded with Mike, I'm really happy with. I mean, I could have quibbles with too much reverb or this or that, but those are things that in the moment I wasn't thinking.
Sure. Another side question. When you went to record Poison for Profit, were you doing that for acid tapes, or were you doing that just to capture those songs? Which came first?
We did it. It was just to capture the songs.
Yeah.
Acid tapes came later. Rick Mank,
Mhm.
I don't think he sent the copy. I think he just mentioned us to Alan Duffy or whoever it was that was at Acid Tapes. I know that Alan was the main guy there at that time. And it was only after we had done it and that Rick had made some comment about us that they reached out to us and it got put out that way or distributed that way.
Yeah, well, definitely exciting. The Hollowmen was the first, other than the chant recorded, but the Hollowmen was the first, band that I played in that I just completely, it was the sound I had been hearing in my head. And I couldn't believe how lucky I was to hook up with Mike, Tom, and Joe and bring this together. At that time too, Des Moines, Iowa is a small town, much like Cedar Falls. And it had a fairly small punk alternative music scene, but everybody was incredibly supportive. If you played a show, all 75 of the people in the scene would come out and see you play and do it the next week and the week after. So it was a time of, a lot of fun, not only playing, but just kind of hanging out with friends and folks in the scene. At that time, Mike and Tom have always been pretty prolific songwriters, but they were writing pretty much a new song every week. So my recollection is every time we got together to practice, there would be a new song that Mike or Tom would present or a new riff. Other times we would just start making crap up and just start jamming on something spontaneous. And there's several songs over the years that just literally came out of just making up noise while we're killing time at practice. For the recording for Poison for Profit, we went to the same studio where Mike and I had recorded with the Chant only about maybe 6 months earlier. A studio called South River Recording, if I recall. Mike Lawyer was the owner and the producer, and I think the engineer. We did it all. We went in. I think we spent, it was probably cost us $300 to $400, if I recall at the time. And by that point, we were pretty tight on those 6 songs. I don't recall a whole lot of, alternate takes and things like that. We pretty much banged them out. We probably had only paid for 4 or 5, 6 hours of time in total. So we had no choice, but and so that, it all happened so fast. I think in hindsight, one of the things I took for granted was just how quickly all of this came together. To go from forming in mid-December to recording our first EP at a good quality studio, literally 90 days later. In hindsight, I guess I took for granted how easily everything fell together and the availability of a studio in Indianola, Iowa, just a 20-minute drive from our homes was, and how affordable it was to do some tracking at that point.
Yeah, I think that Ralph and I, like I said, we've been living this record for the last month, almost 2 or 3 weeks since the showed up from England, which is another story we should discuss because it's just amazing this whole thing is happening. But do you remember the format, Eric? Was it 16 track, 1-inch, or 8 track?
Boy, I'm gonna guess it was at least 16. I think it was 16 track.
I would say that point that 16 track, I think it was 1-inch, was really popular and sounded fast. And this recording to me sounds like that. You know, like you had plenty of room.
Yeah.
There's not like drums on 3 tracks. It's all there and evident, and the separation is wonderful. So we were talking about, and Ralph, I'm going to need you to chime in, but you're from the same town as Mike Lawyer?
I am. Yeah, I grew up in Indianola, and so Eric and I have talked about this a little bit. That when we started talking about this project, I reached out to one of my former classmates with the same last name, just on a whim that they may be connected. And my hunch was correct. And unfortunately, Mike is no longer with us. He passed about 10 years ago. She did a little legwork for me to try to find those tapes, the actual reel, and we were unsuccessful. And so this was working with the Hollowmen was something that Dave and I have kicked around in a lot of conversations. And we kind of kept coming back to this as only a cassette only release. And so literally I looked up Acid Tapes, which was where it was officially released in the UK. Alan Duffy, the owner or the guy who ran Acid Tapes, has gotten out of that business. But there was a very simple website run by a man named Steve Lines that said, I used to do this. I did this for Alan. I sent him an email and said, hey, I'm wondering if you have a tape. It was probably 5, 6, 7 days later, I get a picture of 2 cassettes, the Poison for Profit cassette and a Hollowmen Live cassette. And I think it was a Sunday morning. I was kind of laying in bed looking at my phone and I just couldn't believe it. And so I said, hey, could you send those to us? We'd like to see what you got. And lo and behold, they showed up. It took about 3 weeks. And the Poison for Profit cassette is by far the heaviest cassette I've ever held, which gave me hope that it had really good stuff on it. And we were right. It sounds beautiful. And we've been kind of working through that. And the live show that was included is from 1985 and also amazing quality.
So the band initially, you know, the solid membership was me and Mike Sangster and Eric Svensson. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rick Mank. So Rick was kind of in and out of Des Moines. He went to college at Drake University in Des Moines, and he was kind of a big influence on everybody and going back and forth between Chicago and Des Moines. And he was interested in this project. And I guess he'd done like a gig or something with, or maybe more than one with Eric and maybe with Mike. That was while I was gone, so I don't remember all that stuff. But Mike and Eric wanted to have Rick play drums, be our drummer. And we had a big conflict about that initially, because my feeling was, well, we could get Rick to play on this session and be our drummer for 3 or 4 months, and then he's gone. And he's never coming back. He's graduating, and he's real serious about this, and he's going to move back to Chicago and catch on with somebody big, and which did eventually happen, right? He's been Matthew Sweet's drummer for 30 years. Mm-hmm. So I was a strong advocate for Joe, who I'd seen play with Lonnie Urich and play some instrumental surf tunes. And I just really liked Joe's feel and touch. But he was super green. Like at that point, you know, Mike and Eric and I were all 19, 20, 21. I don't remember everybody's exact age. And Joe was 14 or 15. So, but the replacements were happening, right? So it was cool to have a kid in the band, right? And I just liked, Joe was going to be around. He really liked the music. I liked how it fit. So I kind of talked those guys into, well, because Joe was so green when he first came into the band, like he had no sense of song structure or anything. He'd, he'd drive this music along really well, but fills would come in totally at random. He'd switch from hi-hat to snare willy-nilly. And we started saying, no, you got to think about what part of the song it is and put that stuff in, to change the parts of the song. I mean, and he picked up on all that. His ears were wide open and he was eager to learn. And he picked up on all that and did a great job with it. So, yeah, we just got really, I felt like we got solid with Joe really fast.
Well,
I think it was, what was that?
I was just going to say, we've been listening to the shit out of this record in the process of getting it ready. And Joe's attention to detail is, for somebody his age, is remarkable. And he also, there's little things that, little accents, that little riffs he's doing.
Yeah.
That make it, I love that in a band. And I've tried to do it in stuff I've done with the drummer. But for how young he is, it's absolutely remarkable. And he swings.
Yeah.
This is a very light sounding, moving forward recording. And I think all of us have listened to enough drummers to know when the drummer's not up to par. And Joe, there again, his age doesn't really matter. It's either you're good or bad. But considering his age, it's remarkable, And I'd like to talk, since Joe's not here to represent himself, how did you meet Joe? I mean, how did you become aware, or why were you hanging out with 15-year-olds, Tom, is what I wanted.
He thought he was Tommy Stinson.
Well, I'm sure various members of the Urich clan.
Yeah.
So Lonnie Urich, Don Urich, Troy Urich, the late Wendy Urich, and Jenny Hibbler. It was a sibling clan in Des Moines that were always around on the and Troy, how could I forget Troy Urich? So Troy and Joe were best friends, and they were both drummers, and Joe was like just a presence in the Urich household, and he was really good friends with Jenny Hibbler, the youngest Urich. And so like I said, I just saw Joe. I mean, the alternative music, or whatever you want to call it, we didn't know what to call it. That term didn't really exist at the time. Punk rock scene or new wave scene or whatever terms were around at the time. In a place like Des Moines, Iowa, it was small and it was tribal. You had like, I don't know, 100 people tops, not all of them musicians. Everybody knew everybody. So like, if you were attracted to this thing, there were older people who, there were people, probably there, not a lot of them, but probably a few people from the baby boom generation who are attracted to it and part of it. And then, solid Gen Xers, like Joe, and then people on the cusp like me and Mike and Eric. It was tribal. He was around. Like I said, he was playing drums for Lonnie and Don Urich in a real early version of the Catalinas.
So are you from Springfield?
Yeah, I'm from Springfield, Illinois.
So then just a little bit of that background. What, you came here to go to school, or?
Yeah, I moved to Des Moines to go to Drake University.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask real quickly, like, Dave captured this really quickly or accurately, like listening to those songs for a first recording session for a band. As you talked about Joe's playing, there's such unbelievably great chemistry on those songs. You can tell exactly what happened and what you described. It's such a great collection of songs. Sometimes on first releases, bands are all over the place because they've been writing their whole lives to get to that release. This seems like a very, very concise group of songs. There's tremendous restraint that's given. Would those songs have been played live in the studio? Were you doing different parts? Or do you recall?
That was all pretty much live in the studio.
Okay.
I don't remember how we did the vocals.
Okay.
Going back to your question, how did it come about, or what I remember about recording there? I'm pretty sure it was Mike. Knew Mike Lawyer, who was the head honcho at that recording studio, which the studio was had been, as I understand it, it was Head East's studio.
Yep.
Because I remember that distinctly, seeing a gold record of Flat as a Pancake on the wall in the studio. I'm pretty sure it was Mike who, but I could be wrong. It might have been a combination of Mike and Eric. I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't know Mike Lawyer at all.
Okay.
I'd never been in a recording studio at all. That was my first time in any kind of recording studio. I hadn't recorded anything other than on a boom box, you know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was real hungry